what I would like to talk about is our current reality and how we can retrace it from specific and not so specific points and zones in history. And what interests me most today is the role of China in the world and the way that it's very hard to figure out for the West and also the East, and that we're being in Russia right now, and that there are new alliances starting to take shape in the 21st century that weren't conceivable of before. What I'm trying in my research, but what we're also trying with the students here at Strelka, was to come up with narratives and counter-narratives of historical nature that try to retrace this sort of interaction and extraction of historical knowledge in our cybernetic reality today. One narrative could be that we can retrace it to the 16th century and to a very specific point in time that has to do with the publication of one specific book and the arrival of one specific letter in Europe, which is an amazing historical coincidence. The book I'm talking about is The Introduction to the Analytic Art by François Viette, which is the first book containing a mathematical formula in the history of mankind, thus introducing the alphabet into the state of operation, and the way that the alphabet could be used not only to tell stories, but to describe processes and to describe nature. At the very same time, when this work on the alphabet seems to be done or seems to enter a new stage, a new writing system starts to appear in Europe, which is the Chinese writing system. So some Jesuit missionaries who made their way to China over years sent the news of this new writing system to Europe, telling us that it's a completely different writing system than the one that we are used to, which consists of a certain finite amount of numbers and letters that can be used in combination to express any infinite amount of information. The Chinese writing system, however, has about, I think the letter says, 75,000 different characters and works in a mysterious and magic way. And the transmission of knowledge that is set into motion in this instance is something that is quite unique in history, because the symbolic starts to explode in Europe. The scientific revolution happens because mathematics starts becoming really powerful as a tool in a way that shapes our culture until today. It becomes the infrastructure of knowledge and technology and everything that's connected to it. And at the same time, the Chinese writing system becomes the imaginary of this symbolic notion. This is not to say that the West understood how Chinese worked. They did not at all. It was very much about the misunderstanding and the misconceptions and misreadings and abuses of this concept that the West started to think about the way that knowledge could be put into symbolic forms and thus processed and computed. The very idea of computability is something that comes from this interaction between two different notational systems and a clash of civilizations and cephalizations, if you will. This is something that then sort of, also because the way history works as we know it, as a colonialist Western conception of it, is something that doesn't only work on a cultural level, on an economic level, but also on an epistemological level, on the level of knowledge and the level of education. So what the history books tell us is mainly the story of the glorious spread of the West, which brought knowledge to the East and to every other country in the world, and was very victorious in that. But if you open up a channel between two cultures and between different systems, if you start to establish such an infrastructure, inevitably you will have movements in all of the directions. So what I'm interested in is trying to uncover and retracing these traces and trace amounts. Sometimes they're not even clear, but they can just be trace amounts, like you can find trace amounts of chemicals or nuclear waste in the soil of humankind, if you will. And this is something that can be traced further into the 20th century, when in the very nativity scene of our cybernetic culture, China pops up again. When Norbert Wiener in the 1930s takes up a position at Tsinghua University in Beijing, and starts studying Chinese, but at the same time also starts the design of his first circuit boards. So there's again a very, very poetic but also sort of factual connection between writing systems, between conceptions of symbolic connections and even ideographic connections or aesthetic connections between the characters that he learns and the circuit boards he designs. But also on a philosophical level, the also maybe misunderstood or overly interpreted notion of the philosophy of nature as it shows itself to us in China, that of Taoism, where everything is also in a certain form of harmony and feedback relation with each other. If you think of the yin-yang and other kitschy symbols like this is something that can clearly be then seen in the way that cybernetics conceives itself and perceives itself as the science and sort of culture of feedback and harmonious loop mechanisms. This, of course, then has all kinds of different manifestations, the first one being the Second World War, and then goes on into constituting the technological infrastructures and realities that we live in today. And I think the relationship of nature, technology, civilization, culture, the symbolic and the political, but also the social, in the way that the world is being shaped today, and that's something that shouldn't have been possible by the standards of the 20th century, by the standards of the Cold War and cybernetics, namely the society that China presents today, which is that of a socio-economic paradox of socialist hypercapitalism, can be more easily understood if we start to stop just thinking through the Western eyes and try to pay more attention to traces of knowledge, to trace amounts, not to the main dominant narratives of history, but to all the minuscule elements that go into it.